This week on Inside Scoop, are Americans minding their manners? What should conservatives really think about President Trump's flag-burning executive order? The future of woke corporate culture after the Cracker Barrel crack-up. Welcome to Inside Scoop, where we talk about all the news that's fit to print in the Washington Examiner magazine. I'm Jim Antle, your host. And this week on our cover, by Peter Tonget, is a story looking at whether we're minding our manners anymore in America. And if we're failing to do that, is this contributing to a decline in our culture? We're a much more casual country than we used to be. We dress more casually. We swear more frequently. We use profanity in settings that we didn't used to. And so is that making us a coarser, more divisive, more profane and vulgar society? Some people think so. Now it's very common on television to use words that were once strictly forbidden.
I'm going to say one thing, F Trump.
Now really only primetime are things enforced as closely as they used to be. Political slogans and signs that are wielded at protests often have anatomically impossible suggestions for the people being targeted by the protests. A lot of vulgarity, a lot of anger. And so as a result of all of this anger, is the society that we're living in less harmonious? Is it contributing to how we don't get along as well as we used to? And were there reasons that we used to have the standards that we did, where we had a certain expectation of dress, a certain expectation of how we presented ourselves in public, and a certain expectation of how we spoke to others? Do those things really contribute to cultural advancement? And does a society that loses those standards end up in a whirlwind of perpetual decline? Our author in this week's issue of the magazine argues that the answer is yes, that we will decline and deteriorate as a result of embracing profanity, embracing casualness, and not having the same kind of manners that we used to have. Now that doesn't necessarily mean everybody has to be following the Emily Post etiquette book in every setting, but there is something that is lost when people no longer feel the need to dress up even for events like church, jury duty, being on television. And then there's things that are lost when we speak to each other in ways that don't convey a certain mutual respect. Do we lose our perception, our well-founded belief in human dignity when we talk to each other in not only casual ways, but very vulgar ways? Or were we simply too uptight in the past? What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. And I'm joined this week by Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Christopher J. Scalia. And Christopher, thanks for being here with us this week.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You've done a piece in this week's issue of the magazine looking at President Trump's flag-burning executive order. And obviously most conservatives don't like the practice of burning the flag. But there has long been a divide among conservatives over whether it constitutes protected speech or not. Could you walk us through a little bit about the sort of the history of that debate?
Absolutely. The divide is really most noticeable in 1989, the Supreme Court decision, Texas v. Johnson, a 5-4 decision. And it was a really interesting split. The majority included some well-known progressive justices, Harry Blackmun, Thurgood Marshall, William Brennan, but then also 2 Reagan appointees, Anthony Kennedy and my father, Antonin Scalia. And then the minority opinion, the dissent, was written by William Rehnquist, the Chief Justice, whom Reagan appointed to that position, Reagan's first Supreme Court pick and the first woman on the court, Sandra Day O'Connor, and then Byron White, who was a moderate, and John Paul Stevens, who was liberal. So it was a really surprising combination of votes. I think people would have assumed that the conservatives would have been against flag burning. But that just all the liberals would have been supported as a free speech right. But that's not what happened. But in any event, the majority ruled that Gregory Johnson, a Texas man who burned United States flag outside the Republican convention in Dallas in 1984, was protected constitutionally by the First Amendment. Flag burning, contrary to a Texas law which fined him and put him in prison, flag burning was protected by the speech clause of the Constitution. My father subsequently explained that flag burning to him was constitutional as much as he despised the act, because as the phrase would have been understood by the people who ratified the Constitution, the freedom of speech included not only direct speech, spoken words, but also symbol and symbolic acts. So Morse code, semaphore, and in this case, burning a flag would have been protected. Now, fast forward to 2016, after Trump won that first presidential election, beating Hillary Clinton, he tweeted, it was then called Twitter, that he thought flag burning, people who burn flags should be arrested and fined. And so the executive order he issued on August 25th is kind of a fulfillment of that very early expression, that desire he had to punish people for burning the flag. In the press conference in which he discussed that executive order, he said that this executive order would ensure that flag burners are fined and get a year in jail. The actual executive order is much more cautious and circumspect. What the executive order does is say people who burn American flags, will be considered by the Justice Department prosecuted for related crimes, for example, trespassing or things like that. And it seems like the Justice Department is going to litigate certain cases to see whether there's any wiggle room within for more exceptions under the First Amendment, and particularly for what's known as fighting words. And those are examples of expressions that are just really meant to incite violence. Texas v. Johnson basically said that when Gregory Johnson burned an American flag outside the Republican National Convention, those weren't fighting words. So I don't know what instances of flag burning would constitute fighting words. So I think even they're on shaky legal grounds. But the executive order itself is not the flagrant violation of Supreme Court precedent and the First Amendment that President Trump would have intimated.
So Trump has himself at various points argued that flag burning might cause riots, or it might get people to fight each other and beat each other up.
More than that, he's in the Oval Office, he said that we're seeing that happen. He said that the Supreme Court protected flag burning under their First Amendment. He said, and that was based on speech, but I think there's a better argument.
Through a very sad court, I guess it was a 5-4 decision, they called it freedom of speech, but there's another reason which is perhaps much more important. It's called death.
And he went on to say that we're seeing tons of flag burning and it leads to incredible violence and many riots. I don't know what examples he's talking about of incredible violence caused by flag burning. I think we have seen instances of flag burning by the Hamas supporters, for example.
Sure.
But those acts have not caused the riots. The riots were already going on, and they have not led to great instances of violence either.
So after Texas versus Johnson, Congress sort of acted,
Yes.
but they didn't pass or try to advance a constitutional amendment, as many people thought would be required. Tried
Yes.
to do it legislatively, and most states had banned flag burning prior to Texas v. Johnson. Now Congress tried to do it. The Bush White House, the George H.W. Bush White House, they were eager to sign it, but they were pretty skeptical that this was going to pass Supreme Court muster, and ultimately it
did not. Yeah, that was 1990, and again, another flag burning case, and the same 5-4 breakdown ruled that the federal law, which was slightly different than the Texas law, was unconstitutional. And you're right, 48 states had flag burning cases or flag burning laws on the books. People who think that, like President Trump and Vice President Vance, who think that flag burning is not protected by the First Amendment, often say that for as long as the republic has existed, flag burning was forbidden. And that's really not true. First flag burning laws that were about political expression didn't, or flag desecration laws that had to do with flag burning didn't come about until World War I. There were flag desecration laws that made it illegal to use images of the flag for advertising purposes. But President Trump likes using the American flag for advertising. He has the American flag on his shoes, for example. So I'm not sure that they're going to want to point to those laws as precedent for what they're up to here.
Does the difference in the composition of the Supreme Court matter in this? I mean, obviously, it is a majority conservative Supreme Court, but even Clarence Thomas wasn't on the Supreme Court yet the first time this was ruled on, or the most recent time it was ruled on.
When my father was on the court, when he was first on the court, he was really the only originalist. That has changed, and in large part, it's changed because of President Trump and the excellent appointments he made during his first term. The majority is originalist. So if all of those originalists take my father's view of the First Amendment and how flag burning applies to it, then I don't think this would have a shot at the Supreme Court. But originalists don't always disagree, and there is room for a disagreement. Even here, to give one example, one of the conservatives in the late 80s who disagreed with that flag burning case was Robert Bork. Robert Bork had been nominated by Ronald Reagan to serve on the court. He was a very influential originalist who, of course, didn't make it to the Supreme Court.
Right.
But he thought that flag burning was not protected under the First Amendment. He disagreed with my father on that. So I don't know for sure. It's hard to say definitively, but my hunch is that if it did come to the Supreme Court again in similar circumstances, the rule Texas v. Johnson would not be overturned.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Jim.
If you're following us on YouTube, you can read Christopher's full article in our Washington Examiner magazine. The executive order cracking down on flag burning is one of many that President Trump has pursued since returning to office a few months ago. But executive orders are nothing new. Our Amy Delora explains how they've been used to push presidents' agendas since George Washington.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, the Honorable Donald John Trump.
In the 6 months since his inauguration, President Donald Trump has implemented many substantial executive orders, transforming American foreign and domestic policy.
That's a big one. A lot of big ones, huh?
Just last month, he nationalized the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department.
Washington, D.C. should be one of the safest, cleanest, and most beautiful cities anywhere in the world. And we're going to make it that. We're going to make it safe. We're going to make it smart. We're going to make it beautiful.
And ordered the Justice Department to consider burning the American flag a crime.
Because the people in this country don't want to see our American flag burned and spit on.
He redesigned American foreign policy through tariffs and actions on immigration.
Birthright. That's a big one.
As with everything about this president, his actions have provoked strong reactions. The reality is, it's much more commonplace than either side would like to admit. Like his predecessors over the last 100 years, Trump has used the inherent power of the presidency to expand executive power to accomplish his policy goals in the face of legislative gridlock. Executive orders have only been systematically cataloged since the 1930s, but they go back to the Washington administration, which famously declared American neutrality in 1793 in the face of British and French hostilities. The early origins of direct action speak to inherent powers that the president possesses. The first and most significant is his constitutional authority. Article 2 is short and vague, with a few key clauses that have been the basis for sweeping claims of presidential power. Congress has also given the president statutory authority, usually happy to unload it on the president, as it foists upon the executive the responsibility for failure. The president is on his strongest ground when these two authorities intersect. Most controversially, presidents have also claimed an inherent power to act unilaterally, such as Abraham Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War, or Teddy Roosevelt's intervention in the 1902 coal strike, or in 1952 when the Supreme Court struck down Harry Truman's seizure of steel mills. Thus, Trump rewriting the nation's international trade laws with a single executive order, dramatic as it is nothing new.
because without the tariffs, this country is in serious, serious trouble.
President George W. Bush created the Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, despite its blurring of church and state. It was Obama whose Iran deal sought to reshape Middle East policy without bothering to negotiate a treaty approved by the Senate. And it was Biden's decision not to enforce the nation's immigration laws that brought tens of millions of people into this country illegally. The reality is, Trump is expanding executive power from an already vast foundation of presidential prerogative. No wonder the ratchet of executive authority has moved in only one direction over the last century. The short-term political logic of presidential action is essentially undeniable for Democrats and Republicans alike. The long-term constitutional implications, while dire, are not really a concern to those who temporarily wield power in our system. I'm Amy DeLaura for Washington Examiner.
And joining us this week is Washington Examiner magazine contributing writer Graham Hillard, who has written about the controversy involving Cracker Barrel. Graham, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks for having me.
So, Graham, obviously, to some degree, the whole Cracker Barrel flap has been resolved, or at least seemingly so. But is it emblematic of a broader issue in corporate and maybe even just American culture right now?
I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is a shifting of people of conservative and progressive values into different neighborhoods, into different lifestyle trends, into different corporate loyalties. And yet corporations seem at times to be unhappy with that allotment. And so we see corporations such as Cracker Barrel saying, hey, we notice that our customers tend to be a little more conservative, maybe skewing older, maybe whiter than we'd prefer. Let's scrap those people and find a new set of customers.
Right. And so sometimes what happens is, obviously a lot of people, they'll want a younger audience or a younger customer base or a younger demographic. But the risk sometimes is when you pursue these demographics that you're not already attracting, you actually just repel your existing customer base.
Yeah, that's right. And I would actually go farther and say that people will age into liking Cracker Barrel, and so I understand that the problem with an old customer base is that they have a pesky habit of dying on you, right? But
Yes.
My sense is that there's youngsters coming up behind our oldsters who will one day be in the mood for those Southern fried knickknacks that at least used to hang on the walls.
Right. Old people die, but young people get old.
That's right.
Yeah. So a lot of people who were critical of Cracker Barrel's attempted rebranding, since abandoned, thought they were trying to be woke. I thought an interesting point that you raise in your piece is whether there's a form of wokeness that's going on the right in terms of people being hypersensitive to perceived slights in the other direction.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think it's just part of the lamentable widespread divvying up of the American voting base into identity groups. And so, we've seen for years that people of color and people with various special interests are being pursued by politicians along those lines. And so it's in a sense inevitable, but certainly helped along by Donald Trump and his MAGA movement, that white people and particularly blue collar white people, who I think are kind of the core Cracker Barrel constituency, would begin to think of themselves in those terms. And so it's almost an amoral phenomenon. Whatever we think about, the politics of white grievance, it's just a fact that if you're Bud Light, if you're Walmart, if you're Cracker Barrel, you just cannot cheese off your customer base, right? Because they have been taught to think of themselves as an identity group like any other.
So do you think what's happened with Cracker Barrel and what happened with Bud Light before that, do you think these are sort of cautionary tales that companies, at least with maybe more conservative customer bases, are going to be more reluctant to pursue these things in the future?
Well, I hope that that's the case because I'm for the depoliticization of daily life. And I think that there are some, I make this point in the article, I think there are some firms that are so dominant in American life that they can essentially do what they like. And I use the example of the NFL. I can't imagine that there's a single human being in the world who's like, yes, end zone stenciling with social justice messages. This is exactly what I wanted. Or, I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan. Let's try out the black national anthem and then play the real national anthem. It's absurd. But the NFL, I mean, come on, they can do whatever they want, and I'm going to keep watching. I think companies in the, Cracker Barrel, John Deere, even the Walmart category, they have to be careful because there are alternatives out there. And if these legacy companies start aggravating their existing customers, I also think that the market will provide alternatives for people like my friends and me who don't want to support companies that seem to be antagonistic to our values.
And I guess the only really big exception to that was Coca-Cola, where New Coke backfired without there even really being a political component to that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think that, if Cracker Barrel had said, we're gonna keep the stores the same, we're gonna keep the logo the same, but we're changing our menu. We've decided that gravy is bad for y'all. I think that, that's not quite ideological, although Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might disagree. But
Right.
I think that would have annoyed people just the same. Yeah.
A gravy-free vegan menu at Cracker Barrel.
Yes, that's right. And the irony, and it's related to what we're talking about. I just can't imagine that actual vegans would rush to Cracker Barrel to eat from that menu because, of course, they have their existing establishments. And so a vegan gravy-free Cracker Barrel, just like a corporate minimalist Cracker Barrel, is going to find itself with no customers rather than new and better customers.
Thank you, Graham.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You can read Graham's full article and all the stories we discussed in today's episode at Washington Examiner magazine. This has been your Inside Scoop. I'm Jim Antle, your host. We'll catch you next time.